Well, so I'm just thinking about like for myself, like I have an old sports injury in my knee, for example, and it bothers me sometimes if I'm working out or whatever. It'll bother me sometimes, but I can get by. You know what I mean? I
Hmm.
can adjust or whatever, so it doesn't really affect my work or it doesn't really affect my ability to do the things I need to do to take care of my kids or get around the house or take care of my household responsibilities. But I'm thinking, well, once I get to be 60, 70, 75, 80, that knee might play that aggravated knee might cause a bigger and bigger problem going forward. Do you have ways of accounting for that or identifying those types of issues?
That would be up to the orthopedic surgeon, maybe an MRI, and then they will determine whether the injury exacerbated an old injury. As a nurse, we do not diagnose with medical diagnoses. We only do nursing diagnosis.
So you mentioned earlier that you might there's certain circumstances under which you might reach out to the treating physicians or the orthopedists or those kinds of things. Um, how often do you do that, and what does that typically look like?
So like during life care plans, I will do an assessment of the client after I've reviewed their records and summarize them. And then after the assessment, I'll put a questionnaire together and I will send that out to their physician. Then I will do follow-ups, making sure they got the form, they filled out the form. After they've sent it back, I review it. I make sure that I've addressed everything, and then I will make sure I reach out to the client one more time, make sure that what I've addressed is what they're saying is what they've addressed. And then I will collaborate, call that physician and go over the client's questionnaire with them based on what their recommendations are. Make sure there are no changes and I didn't misinterpret something.
Okay, so then let me ask you this. Does any part of your let's take somebody who's paralyzed or lost a limb, for example, in one of these catastrophic accidents. Um, at, you read about medical technology, you read about uh, the future of medicine and all the different things they're doing, whether it's stem cells or sort of prosthetic limbs or uh, artificial intelligence or whatever. Um, does any of your work account for any of these sort of break technologies that might really change and impact a person who's suffered a catastrophic injury, or is it more sort of conventional type things?
No, absolutely. I just did a cost projection for a gentleman who had a crush injury and he lost these two fingers, his pinky and his ring finger. And I reached out to two different prosthetic people, and one person does them to where they look almost natural, so it looks like your real finger, and then one is more mechanical. So I got cost projections for those, and I put those in my cost projection, but I left both different ones in there versus taking one over the other because I'm not that client. And he gets the option to decide, do I want more natural looking or do I want the mechanical one? So that was sent back to the attorney for them to discuss with the client so that they could incorporate which one that he would prefer, um, because he was, very depressed from losing his fingers and not looking natural. And so we had to do some psychology evaluations and therapy for him on that as well. So no, we definitely take into futures.
Do
I
you
can't,
find, sorry,
that's okay.
do you find a lot of people after catastrophic injuries have psychological injuries that are diagnosed and that need to be treated?
Yes, absolutely.
Uh, what what does that look like? What does that future care look like in the case of a diagnosed mental health injury that's subsequent to a physical injury, traumatic?
Um, Huge is depression. Huge is very huge is depression. And then social anxiety they'll get because of now they might look different or they might act different, or they don't have the same personalities they used to have. So they definitely need long-term psychotherapy, someone to talk to, someone to help address those situations, someone to give them guidance on how to um, look at those and try to change maybe some of their habits that they used to do and then incorporate new things to help them get back out there and have a quality life.
So do you run into some of those conditions that are not diagnosed? Do you ever see things records and think, hey, this person really should have a mental health assessment to see if they do have any of these depression or social anxiety or different personality sort of situations?
Yeah, because when I review the records, I'm reading almost everything and including everything that that client will state. Because, you know, if they're stating I'm like so depressed or I can't do this anymore, I can't do that anymore, I always incorporate at least an evaluation with the psychotherapist and there or psychologist. An evaluation is definitely, you know, key. And then they can always add in more visits. So being not a, you know, being not a physician myself, I would always give them the opportunity of at least an evaluation.
You mentioned something about someone having a different personality after something like this. What do you mean? Give me an example, and why would that be the case?
They might hit their head on the steering wheel. They might hit their head on the back of the headrest or the side of the window, or when they fall, they hit their head on the ground. It just depends on where they might hit their head. It could change who they are. But it could also just change from not even hitting their head just because it's a new, like, let's say the gentleman who lost his fingers. Now he's got a whole different outlook on what he looks like. That's traumatic in, you know, their social aspects, or they're depressed now because they don't look like they used to.
So, for example, we see this sometimes when young people will have a debilitating or maybe even a disfigurement. Then they have some social anxiety about, okay, what's it going to be now when I go on a date, when I go to work, when I go in a social setting? Are people going to look at me differently? Are people going to treat me differently? Are people going to feel sorry for me? Are people going to be repulsed? These kinds of things, you know, are natural questions that people have in that. Are these the kind of things that you're talking about?
Correct. Yes.
And what would be the prescribed treatment for these kinds of things? What would you do to address the future medical need of something like this?
Psychotherapy, definitely someone they can communicate with, a psychologist. Those are
So there's,
the
I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, that, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So what you're trying to focus on is what are the comprehensive medical needs of a person who has a traumatic injury. If there is a way to treat their medical condition physically, then that's a part of it. If there's some future technology that might be available, that's a part of it. If there's a psychological component, that's a part of it. And you're trying to quantify all these things and put them together in a usable report that the lawyer for this traumatically injured person should be able to use to get compensation to fund the treatment that's needed in the future. Is that the idea?
Correct.
So, let me ask you, as far as these psychological injuries, well, first, let me ask you, are you doing more? How long have you done this type of work? And are you seeing it used, these type of future medical analysis, calculations and projections used more now, or are they used less now than they were, say, 5, 10, 20 years ago?
Well, I haven't been doing the cost projections five or 10 years ago. I've been doing them for 3 years now. But I see them quite frequently in all the reports that I do based on their records.
Okay, and you said, and let me ask you this: the mental health component to it. Um, are you seeing? It seems like years ago, people didn't take those mental health injuries as seriously as they do now. They would sort of, you know, the first priority would be the physical health, and these mental health treatment um, plans or mental health injuries weren't taken as seriously as that. Is that your observation as well, or do you feel differently?
No, I feel the same way. I feel they always focus on the mechanical injury portion versus our psychosocial and the psychotherapy part of it.
But do you feel like the social psychotherapy part of it is important?
Oh, absolutely.
So, are you seeing more of those types of analyses, and are you finding them to be, and what's the reception of these kinds of this kind of analysis on your part?
I think it's a great reception because people are realizing that not everybody is the same and that not everybody thinks the same and that everybody's brain is different. Because like me getting a car accident, I might not think anything of it because I've been a nurse for so many years. Yeah, whatever, I'll just go on. Where you got somebody else who's never been in one and now they're traumatized. They can't get in their car. They have nightmares of the seeing the traumatic injury or the accident all over again, you know? So yeah, it's huge.
How do you know the difference? I mean, are there objectives ways to see the difference between somebody what are the objective ways to identify a person who's struggling with these kinds of things versus not?
Asking them questions, you know, getting them to talk about the accident. When you do a life care plan, I ask all those questions. Are you sexually still active? And if they say, well, and I say, okay, I know it's a tough subject, but do you have complications with it? Are you fearful of it? Do you feel like you can't perform as much? And then if you can get them talking, it helps. And then you can figure out what you need to do to get them the help.
Are you seeing when you're putting this information together in a report and sending it to the people for whom you work, do you get feedback on whether this was valuable information?
I do not. I don't hear anything back from the attorneys on how the cases went.
Well, so I
How
can tell you from our experience that we find these studies to be in this analysis to be very helpful for us in terms of because a lot of times the adjusters, the lawyers, the people representing the defense or the insurance company will discount any kind of reference to future medical care. The idea being, hey, if you needed the care, you would have already received it. And then sometimes what we find is that this ongoing care, we can't just wait until the end of the care because a lot of people are just never going to finish treating after a catastrophic accident. So for us to be able to build a forecast, reliable forecast based on, experienced people who are in this industry, who use accepted models and accepted literature on how to construct these kinds of future analytical studies, it's really valuable, and it is compelling to first insurance adjusters and insurance defense lawyers, but also to juries. And so we find it to be very, very helpful. What about you? Do you occasionally testify about these kinds of things?
I have testified and I've only seen one, I've done one deposition and then one actual jury trial.
And so why do you think that is? Why is it that you've been doing it for a long time and you've done lots of these things? Why do you think that, or do you have an opinion as to why you haven't had to do it, hadn't had to testify very often?
I think because my reports are pretty, conservative to the fact that I'm not over costing things. And these are things that look, like, yes, this is a possibility that could happen. And then they will mediate it out and they don't go to court.
So the idea then, I guess, is that because you could probably just as easily be an expert for the defense as for the plaintiffs, right? If you're given conservative opinions that are documented in the literature and in the medical records and in your interviews. Is that fair?
And that's fair to say. Yes, I can do both sides.
So you're not really trying to just advocate exclusive for the plaintiff in a way that is only on the plaintiff side of things and all that. You're trying to give an objective findings about what you see and what kind of future medical care will be required. How do you approach it?
That is correct. I've done a couple cases for the defense already where I look at the usual customary reasonable charges to see if they're being charged at the right, the fair value.
Well, let me ask you about that. We hear a lot about this usual, customary, and reasonable charges, and I always have questions about that because I understand the insurance company's perspective. I understand the defense lawyer's perspective when he or she asks about those kinds of things. In other words, we can't have just hospitals charging, $1 million for a broken finger to reset a broken finger. But as a consumer, as a plaintiff, I don't have any control about what that bill is. I don't have any. I go to the doctor or I go to the hospital, or I go to the ER. I have a broken bone or some kind of traumatic injury. I don't even ask for anything. Half the time, a lot of times, that person may not be conscious. What's the response to the argument that, hey, this is beyond what is reasonable and customary in the industry?
So when I do the costings, I take three different databases. So I use those and I look at the 75th percentile. That's the mean between the 50th and the 90th. So it's the 75th. And then I'll have the three databases tell me what the median is. So that's on average across the board. And it's all based on zip codes as well. So we look at the zip code of the person where they're living and then the three databases. And then I pull that mean out. And that's the cost that I project. So I'm at like the 75th percentile. So I'm not way above, I'm not way under. I'm like in the middle ball range. So when my attorneys are going out there and mediating, they know they're not saying, well, we're charging at 150% above what should be charged. So I'm giving them, the leeway of both sides.
What about, do you ever look backwards at medical bills that have already been incurred, not future, but past medical bills, and assess whether those medical bills are reasonable and necessary according to the industry standards that you've described?
Yes, I've done that for the defense. I've gone all the way back to 2017.
You ever do that for plaintiffs' lawyers?
And I've not had one ask me to yet.
So, well, after our discussion today, we might talk to you about that because
Okay.
sometimes the insurance companies will look at our past medical expenses and sort of make those arguments. And my position, is like, yeah, we didn't. How much we owed. Like I didn't make the bill.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but anyway, okay. Well, hey, listen, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you talking to us. I appreciate you giving us all this information. It's been very helpful. So thank you.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.